She stood alone on a dark Florida highway, her thumb raised, waiting for a stranger to stop. To most drivers, she looked like just another desperate hitchhiker, someone tired, someone lost, someone in need of help. But for a few men, stopping their car for her would become the last decision of their lives. Aileen Wuornos was not born a killer. Her story did not begin with violence. Instead, it slowly formed over years of hardship, rejection, and survival in a world that never gave her stability. She was born in 1956 in Michigan into a deeply troubled family. Her father was a convicted criminal who struggled with severe mental illness. He was never part of her life and died in prison when she was still very young. Her mother abandoned her early, leaving Aileen and her brother behind. From the beginning, she grew up without a sense of belonging. She was sent to live with her grandparents, but that home was far from safe or loving. Reports of abuse, neglect, and emotional isolation surrounded her childhood. By the time she was just 11 years old, her innocence had already been taken away. She faced abuse at a very young age and was eventually thrown out of her home as a teenager. With nowhere to go, she was forced to survive on the streets. Life outside offered no protection, no guidance, no second chances. To stay alive, Aileen turned to prostitution. It was not something she chose freely. It was a means to survive in a world where she had no support system. For years, she drifted across different states in America. Sometimes she lived in the woods, sometimes in cheap motels, and often in places that were unsafe and temporary. Over time, she developed a rough and aggressive personality. It was not who she was meant to be, but it became necessary for survival. By the late 1980s, Aileen had made her way to Florida. This is where her life took a significant turn. She met a woman named Moore in a bar. For the first time in her life, Aileen felt understood. The two formed a close relationship, and Aileen became emotionally dependent on her. That connection gave her a sense of comfort she had never experienced before. However, emotional support did not solve her financial problems. She still had no stable income and no clear future. To survive, she continued working as a prostitute, often along highways, where she would approach truck drivers and men traveling alone. This routine soon became a pattern. In 1989, a man named Richard Mallory picked her up while she was hitchhiking. What happened next became one of the most debated parts of her story. Aileen later claimed that Mallory attempted to assault her and that she acted in self-defense. In response, she shot him multiple times. His body was later found abandoned. At the time, it seemed like an isolated incident, but it was not. Over the following year, 6 more men were found dead across Florida. All of them had been shot. All of them had last been seen with a female hitchhiker. As the cases began to connect, it became clear that there was a pattern. Aileen Wuornos was no longer just surviving. She had become the center of a series of murders. Her approach was simple. She would stand on the roadside, appearing vulnerable and in need of help. Men would stop their cars, either to offer assistance or for their own intentions. Somewhere along the journey, the situation would change. A gun would appear, and within moments, the encounter would end in violence. Despite the growing number of victims, Aileen maintained that she was not a cold-blooded killer. She insisted that every act was done in self-defense. According to her, each man had tried to harm her, and she reacted out of fear and survival. In her perspective, she was not the aggressor. She believed she was protecting herself in situations that had turned dangerous. However, investigators found it difficult to accept her version of events completely. Evidence from the crime scene suggested a different possibility. Some victims showed no clear signs of struggle. Personal belongings were missing, and their vehicles were found abandoned in separate locations. These details raised questions about whether the incidents were truly acts of self-defense or something more deliberate. As the number of victims increased, pressure on law enforcement grew. 7 men had been killed, and there was still no confirmed suspect. Eventually, a breakthrough came. Witnesses reported seeing a woman matching Aileen's description with one of the victims. A composite sketch was created and released to the public. It did not take long for someone to recognize her. In January 1991, Aileen Wuornos was arrested. There was no dramatic chase or confrontation. She was taken into custody quietly, bringing an end to a series of killings that had spread fear across the region. At first, she denied involvement. Later, she confessed. Even in her confession, and she remained consistent with her claim: self-defense. She described encounters with violent men and situations where she felt her life was in danger. Prosecutors, however, presented a different narrative. They argued that Aileen had deliberately targeted men, used her situation to gain their trust, and then The case quickly gained national attention. A female serial killer was rare, and the public was divided in its perception of her. Some people saw her as a ruthless criminal responsible for multiple deaths. Others viewed her as a deeply damaged individual shaped by years of abuse, neglect, and survival under extreme conditions. The central question remained, was she a victim of her circumstances, or was she a calculated predator? In 1992, she was found guilty of murder. The court sentenced her to death. In the years that followed, her mental state appeared to decline. Her interviews became increasingly unusual. She spoke about conspiracies, claimed that authorities were controlling her, and expressed fears of unseen forces. Observers watched as her behavior became more unstable. Whatever sense of identity she once had seemed to fade. In 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection. Her final words were unusual, reflecting thoughts about returning someday and seeing people again. With her execution, the case came to a legal end. 7 men had lost their lives. A woman had been executed. But the full truth of what happened between those moments on the highway remains uncertain. Was Aileen Wuornos a remorseless killer who manipulated her victims? Or was she a deeply traumatized individual who reacted violently in situations she believed were life-threatening? There is no simple answer. Her story exists in a space where trauma, survival, and crime intersect. It challenges the way people understand guilt and victimhood. Because sometimes the line between a victim and a villain is not clear, and somewhere in the imagination of those who hear her story, the image remains, a lone figure standing on a dark highway, asking for a ride, a reminder that not every stranger is harmless, and not every story has a clear ending.